So anyway, moving on to a bit of listener feedback. These are a couple of older messages that have kind of been hanging around because I didn't have any other place to stick them. So here they are. Stephen asks about AAC players rather than MP3. He says, I noticed MP3 players made by anyone except Apple are often touted on EDL. What if we consider that MPEG 1 Layer 3 files to be old news and MPEG 4 AAC the wave of the future? Or if not the future, just plain superior nowadays. Are there any alternatives to the iPod for AAC files? Is there such a thing as a generic AAC player? So first off, I don't remember ever recommending a media player of any kind. Maybe I did. I don't remember doing that. We're pretty much all about the phone in my household. That is our primary player. But to answer your question, I am not aware of anything that plays AAC files except Apple devices. That's, while it's not their format, it's their format of choice. And I don't know the answer. So audience, Chris, do you know of a standalone generic non-Apple player that will play AAC files?
I am actually looking to see if I can find the firmware update for the SanDisk player that I use, and I thought it does AAC. I know it does FLAC. Like I said, I know it does FLAC files. Let me see if it does. And for those that know, it's called Rockbox.
I think anything with Android on it supports AAC. I think that's supported in the OS. So any device you have running Android, any tablet or phone, should be able to handle that without any problems. I don't know of any, but I'm sure there are standalone devices running Android. So I think that's your answer, Stephen.
Yeah, I'm still looking AAC because, like I said, I know the Rockbox guys. They've done a lot of work trying to get multi formats into their player. So, yeah, I'm just not able to find it really quick in their wiki. But I know when I moved before I got my phone and I started using that as my primary device, I got one of those little SanDisk clips right here. These little guys works great. The Rockbox firmware installs inline. You don't even see the old firmware, and it works pretty dang good. It does all the stuff that I wanted it to do, and it does FLAC, which is what I had a problem with at the time because I had a lot of FLAC files. Since then, I've moved to Google Music and not use my FLAC files anymore as much, but I still have them. But this little SanDisk was the bee's knees, man. It was the with the fact that I could throw in an SD card, a micro SD card into it, which I forgot I had a 16 gigabyte SD card in there. That it was the thing for me to use. So maybe look at that, see if do some digging into Rockbox and see if it does AAC for you.
I haven't done a standalone audio player since, I don't know, 2007 or 8. I mean, it's been a long time. I did have a couple of them, but it was before I had a smartphone. Even when I got my first BlackBerry, I started using it as my primary media player. And now, like Chris, I've sold my soul to Google. I uploaded all my stuff to Google Music, and I just play. I don't even store things locally. I could, and maybe I should, but I just stream off of Google servers my own stuff, or use Spotify or Amazon Prime Music, or even Google's music, and just play their stuff. So I am not the person to answer that question anymore. I might have been a few years ago.
I know for a long time, like I just showed up in the video feed, I have 2 SanDisk clips because when one was, I was using one as my primary, and then I needed one for my wife and my kids to have, for them to run around when they were doing their exercise. That this was our thing. I mean, usually I was out by myself, so I had my own, and then they would share the other one. But yeah, I would say look around. I'm sure there's something out there that does it. And if it doesn't do it natively, I'm sure there's a firmware update somewhere that will give you the ability. So don't be afraid of voiding those warranty, people. Just don't come back after us when you do void it.
But I do agree with you, Stephen, that MP3 is a codec and a format that is past the prime, right? There are others available, but universality is almost always a few generations behind.
Yeah.
And so that's why these shows are put out in MP3 format, because everybody can play an MP3. Yes, I hear from the Ogg Vorbis people who say that I'm using a non-free codec. Yes, I agree with you. I'm using a non-free codec, but it's one that you can play. It's one that everybody can play. So,
Yeah, most of my personal media is all in Ogg Vorbis. So I actually ended up having to transcode a lot of it because I couldn't upload those files to Google. So the Ogg Vorbis guys are probably a better, format, but university is key.
Right. Okay. So moving on along, Brian, I've had this message in my in basket for like 3 months, and it couldn't. Just didn't know where to put it anywhere. So I wasn't ignoring you, Brian. Just didn't know where to put it. Brian says he may have to go back to Windows 8.
Oh, no.
He says, Mark, Seth, and Chris, I chose a provocative subject line, but first, I'd like to start out with a plug for one of my favorite non-tech podcasts. The Revolutions podcast is a weekly 25 to 30-minute episode covering political revolutions. It's entertaining, clever, witty, and very enjoyable. Over the last year and a half, it's covered the English Civil War, the American Revolution, and is currently deep into the French Revolution. Huh. There's a fresh episode every Sunday night at revolutionpodcast.com, which totally is right up my alley. I'm going to have to subscribe to that one. But a while back, I started speeding up my podcasts because I was working so much and my audiobook listening had cut into it. So, I went to 1.1 speed and then 1.2 speed. Now I'm up to 2.2. And I can burn through 8 hours of podcasts in about 3.5 hours. So I'm having to add feeds now that I didn't used to. So Revolution Podcast is going to be on my list. And it's amazing. Once you get used to it, it doesn't sound abnormal at all. And in fact, when I slow a podcast down to 1x, then it sounds like everyone's talking like this.
That's hilarious. That makes me laugh. I'll have to see if I can move up in speed to see what it's like.
You can retrain your brain, but you got to do it slowly. If you jump straight to like 2.1x, you're like, I don't understand this, and you're not going to be able to do it. But if you take it in jumps, just jump up, to 1.1 or 1.2, and then you'll notice after a little while it doesn't sound normal, abnormal rather. It sounds perfectly normal. So once it sounds perfectly normal, go up a little more till it doesn't. And then after a while, that'll sound perfectly normal. So the things that still don't is obviously when you put music in a podcast and when people are laughing, that still sounds like a robotic because it's so fast.
Sure.
But when people are talking, especially people who speak slowly in a very deliberate manner, like when I'm listening to Leo Laporte on one of his shows, at 2.5x, he still sounds perfectly normal because he's so clear and enunciates so well. On this show, Seth speaks the slowest of the three of us. He sounds entirely normal. I'm the one hardest to catch up on. Even listening to myself, I speak faster than you two put together, I think, sometimes. And so it's harder to follow me, but Seth sounds perfectly normal. It's amazing.
That's hilarious. That's something to play with. I've always thought about doing it, but I never had the need. But
right. And the brain is plastic. You can retrain it to do anything. So
sure.
And I don't have any trouble making the switch. So I can have somebody at 2.5x in my ear, and then a coworker walk up and talk to me, and they don't sound abnormal. My brain has made that switch there that when it comes through headphones, it should be this speed. When it comes out of the air, it should be that speed. And it's only different when I cross the streams. When I listen through headphones at normal speed, it doesn't sound right.
That was going to be my next question: is do normal people sound like they're walking through molasses? Or talking through molasses.
It's fascinating what the human brain can do, and if you train it like that, I'm interested to see how far I can go. Can I get to like 4x and still understand every word somebody says? One of the podcasts I listen to is The Naked Scientist. It's a British-made podcast, and with their accents, I often have to slow it down. Not that they're not clear, just that it's different. And so I can't listen to them at full speed just yet. So I have to back it down for them.
That's very interesting. Huh.
Anyway,
Yeah, that's good. Anyway, keep going.
so continuing with Brian's email, he says, I've been using Linux for 10 or 11 years. 2 years ago, I purchased an HP laptop. Irrelevant note, should it be pronounced a HP laptop or an HP laptop? I could make a case for either one. I personally, I go with an, but yes, people say either one. And it does not like Linux. Performance becomes awful when I have several browser tabs open. Switching tabs or scrolling within a web page can take several seconds. As I'm typing this, there's a lag of a second or so between each key press and the letter appearing on the screen. Typically, the CPU is running at less than 50%, and I'm using about half of the 8 gigs of RAM. All I have is open is one browser window and sometimes LibreOffice, and the system just crawls. I'm leaving out a lot of detail, but what the problems are and what I've tried to do. But I found about kernel bugs that often seem to be affecting this system. Mainly I run Mint Cinnamon, and I've tried several other distros, most recently Fedora, Mageia, and Arch. I've run Arch before on other machines, hoping that a non-Ubuntu base would give better results. If you guys have any advice, I'll gladly take it. But my real question is this: what do you look for when you buy a system to make sure it works well with Linux? I am seriously considering reinstalling Windows. Yes, it's that bad, and maybe running Mint in a virtual box on Windows 8. It seems ridiculous, but it would minimize the interaction with Windows 8. Best wishes, Brian from Overland Park, Kansas.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy pill then if he's going to put 8 on it and then virtualize on top of it to get better performance.
Got to be a video driver issue. It's got to be.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I would say without knowing what model that HP is or what video card is in it, I would almost swear on a stack of Bibles that you have a bad video driver installed. So if it's got NVIDIA, go install the NVIDIA drivers. It'll probably clear it up. If it's Intel, go check and make sure that the Intel drivers are installed. That's my best solution there. Without more information, we're just throwing spit on a wall and hoping something doesn't roll down.
Wow, that's gross. But to answer your question, Brian, what do we do to make sure? The answer for me is nothing. I buy a machine based on what price is almost always the number one factor, and then performance and form factor fall below that. I don't need a big, heavy processing machine. I make sure, I found in my case an SSD will speed up almost everything I do. So I don't do anything, but there are, lists of hardware, supported hardware that you can find. I think kernel.org hosts one. I know other places do. If you just do a quick search for Linux supported hardware, it won't be hard to find something. But personally, in my experience, I've had machines that for some reason or another didn't like Linux, and so I just didn't run Windows. I didn't run Linux on it. I ran Windows. I'm not so married to the OS that I really care that much. I use what runs best on the machine. So if I were you, in your case, I'd put Windows on it and just use it as a Windows machine because, again, I'm not married to Linux. I like Linux, but as you've noted, using a virtual machine, you can still dabble with Linux. And so that's, there are people right now feverishly typing responses on their keyboards to what a sellout I am. But for me, it's all about the OS is just a tool. Right. And I don't care which color the screwdriver is that I'm using as long as I can turn the screw. And so that's the way I look at it.
See, personally, when I go to buy a new machine, I usually do some bare bones Google searching on it to see if anyone else has ran into giant monster bug breaks with the machine. So when I was looking at getting the last Dell that I picked up, I did a quick Google search, and the only problem I ran into with the machine, the model that I bought, was it had a bad Wi-Fi card. For whatever reason, it was a Broadcom card that was not supported by any of the Broadcom drivers in Linux by default. Not a big deal. I went over to Newegg and bought a Wi-Fi card that was supported and would fit, and flipped out the old card, put the new card in, and boom, I'm done. No problems, no issues. The machine works great. The only thing I wish this particular Dell had was a little bit better video card in it, because even running something as lightweight as Cinnamon makes this thing just chug. So you could have a machine that no matter what happens, it just chugs because there's something over top that's, too much of a demand. Try running one of the lighter weight distros. You could try, or not distros, but desktops. Check into XFCE or LXCD,
LXDE.
anyway, LXDE, or the new one that's coming out which I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, where the LXCE guys are jumping in with God dang it, I can't remember what it is. Anyway, it's what they're going into, LXQT. That's it.
Yes. Well, something that I would find interesting as an experiment, Brian, on that machine, don't run a GUI at all. Boot straight to a terminal and see what happens. If you can type super fast and it responds really well in full on terminal mode, then that definitely shows you that it is a software issue. If it's still sluggish there, you got bad hardware. And 2 months later, you're probably not going to be able to return the device. Sorry, it took us so long to get it to you.
You could probably even do the. Does Mint still leave on if you Control Alt F to go to different work zones?
I haven't tried it in a while. I don't know, and I'm scared to right now.
I wouldn't. Yeah, don't try it right now. But I don't have a Mint machine running that I could check. But I know my Fedoras do. They still leave the extra work panels on. Where if you go Control Alt F1 through F7, will cycle through different interfacing with the machine, so you have different logins. So you'd be able to even get to your login screen, Control Alt F3 probably, and you'd be able to be in full on terminal mode with your GUI still running behind you, but it wouldn't be. It doesn't sit in the way. So the interfacing would be at full speed if you don't have hardware issues.
So if you're intent on running Linux on something and you got to buy a machine that works well with Linux, do your research beforehand. It's not difficult. A few Google searches will do the job. And what it's better to look for, and I think Chris nailed it, is don't look for what's supported. Look for problems related to the thing you're looking at. So if you're, go ahead.
I was going to say the other problem you might end up having is the initial install is roses, but they release a kernel update a month later and it blows your machine off the planet. Welcome to Linux. Right. It kind of happens.
As a Linux user, it does frustrate me that almost every time I turn my computer on, the update manager is saying, "Hey, got something to update." And I get it. It's better to update now than leave stuff unupdated. Do it monthly or quarterly or whatever. But it sure is frustrating that every day something's got to be updated. It's alert fatigue.
Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to update, though, Mark.
See, I'm scared not to, though, particularly the ones that say they're security updates.
Yeah, well, the security ones, but they won't cause you to reboot. So the ones that bother me is when I get an everyday update for a kernel release or some subsystem that forces a reboot in order for the update to hit.
Which is pretty unusual, really.
It is, but there's been a couple of, what was it, 6 months ago, 7 months ago or something, where we had 3 updates in the Fedora community, one every day for like 3 or 4 days in a row, and it was an update. It was a forced update, or not a forced update, but it was a security recommended update that required a reboot for it to take effect.
See, again, I turn my laptop off every night. I shut it down every day. So again, rebooting isn't a big deal for me.
Yeah, laptop's not a problem. My big desktop here that I game on, different story.
Right. With an SSD, the difference between suspending and turning off is nothing. So I cold power off every time.
Yeah. Once I move to a solid state, and I have this pretty new solid state drive for my big machine when I have the time to format and reinstall in between shows, because Mark would be sad if I said, "Oh, I don't have my machine rebuilt from my format, so I can't be on the show."
Well, don't do that. Just clone it. Don't format reinstall. Just clone it.
I could.
That's what I do.
Might as well, get rid of the sins of the past.
I just saw this week a 6 terabyte SSD. The price was not something I would even consider discussing, but the fact that it exists and is available for the consumer is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, 6 terabytes is awesome. I would love a 6 terabyte solid state drive.
I think the biggest drive I've ever bought was a 2, maybe 2.5, of any format.
Well,
But
see, I've bought threes. I bought 3 terabytes for my media machine.
so it's amazing what the world is coming to, where 6 terabytes is now roughly the size of a credit card, and requires almost no energy and has no spinning
Mhm.
disk.
I can't wait till the price comes down to a point where we all can afford it.
Speaking of things you can afford a Linux education over at linuxacademy.com, where their goal is to take you from being a Linux novice to a Linux professional by way of their step-by-step video courses. And let's just jump straight into the meat of it. The price, I've gone on and on about what they have, about the videos, about the labs, about the high quality content. Let's get to the meat of it. It's $25 a month. That's it. That's the most you can ever pay for their basic service. Now, they do have other expanded services that you can pay for, but $25 a month gets you a heck of a lot. But if you want to buy more, like anything else, like toilet paper and donuts, the more you buy, the less you pay. $65 buys you 3 months, and $215 buys you a full year, which is only less than $18 a month. So put $25 in on my endorsement. If I have earned $25 worth of trust in you, go give it a try. Poke around for a month. If you hate it, cancel it and walk away. If you don't hate it, and I'm pretty sure you won't, then you can buy those larger packages, and you're going to get to see this robust and super amazing, powerful, awesome lab system that they got, where you can run up to 4 machines simultaneously, interacting with each other and interacting with the real world in a safe environment, where you can feel free to wreak havoc and destroy things without danger of losing anything important to you. You're going to find their study guides. You're going to find the community. You're going to find this whole group of people on the journey with you, and you're going to find the creators and the maintainers of the content readily accessible to you. You're not going to get that anywhere else for $25 a month. I hang my hat on that sentence. There may be other services that are comparably priced, but they don't offer what linuxacademy.com does. Check them out, linuxacademy.com. And if you go to linuxacademy.com/everydaylinux, you'll see some special pricing there just for our audience. Check them out. Let them know we sent you.
And there you go.
And moving on now to our just random trivia. And some of these I dug up. Some of them Chris dug up. Hopefully, each one will become a bit of a discussion on its own. But let's start with the definition of trivia, because yes, I'm a geek and I know that. So trivia is a compound word, a portmanteau, as the French call it, of the Roman trivia. The trivia in Rome was, the old phrase, all roads lead to Rome. Well, 3 main roads came together at one intersection called the trivia, 3 ways. And pretty much everybody in Rome crossed through the trivia at some point. So it became a popular place to post things. It was essentially a bulletin board where you'd post information that may or may not be beneficial, that not everybody would care about, trivial things that might not be interesting. And so the trivia became the place for small snippets of information. Therefore, it became known as trivia. How's that?
Oh, that was good. That was a good one. Interesting.
So we're going to post some nuggets today that may or may not be of interest to everybody. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite things, the GIMP. Did you know that the entire GNOME project owes its life to the GIMP? It's not the other way around. GIMP, Peter Mattis and Spencer Kimball, I'm pretty sure are their names. They decided for a senior project to write Photoshop, and they realized that the tools of the day were too crude to do that. The open source, the available tools to them were too crude to do that. So they created the GTK, the GIMP toolkit, to help them write their senior thesis, which was the GIMP. other people took the GIMP toolkit, this amazing set of tools they put together for imaging, for working with images and rendering images, and created the GNOME desktop project out of the GIMP toolkit. So there you go. Your beloved GNOME, people, owes its life to my beloved GIMP.
There you go. I knew that one. That was a good one, actually. There's a lot of people that never realize that. So technically, then anything GNOME derivative. So Cinnamon.
Anything running the GTK framework. So there's essentially only two frameworks right now. There's GTK and Qt. Everything is based on one of those two. I mean, that's a gross generalization, but easily 90% of the desktop environments out there are based on either the GTK, the GIMP toolkit, or the Qt toolkit. And that's where the KDE folks come in line.
And that's where I like to live, is in the Qt framework. That was bad. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And another thing that my beloved GIMP gave to you was Tux. The Tux Penguin was created in one of the early versions of GIMP, and Linus Torvalds himself suggested that Linux needed a mascot, and there was a bit of a, I don't know if a competition is a word, but there was sort of a call for ideas, and the Penguin won, and the Penguin that has been in use and now, you know, variations all over the place. The very first one who's that you've seen sitting with his feet in front of him, that original Tux was created in my beloved GIMP.
Did you know that Tux technically there is no penguin that has feet the color of Tux or orange feet?
That's right. The closest would be the what's the Linux distribution named after a penguin? Gentoo.
Oh.
The Gentoo penguin
Gentoo
has orangish feet, but not exactly the same colors as Tux.
Yep. And there is no natural penguin that has orange feet. So interesting.
So I thought we'd start off the show with some Linux trivia. Linux is sort of, again, a portmanteau, it's a folder, actually. It's a folder name on an FTP server that is actually still out there. It stands for Linus's Minix. So Minix was a derivation of Unix. It was Unix was proprietary, Minix was free. Maybe not, now that I think about it. Maybe Minix was even not free. Linus, again, wanting to scratch his own itch, decided to write his own version of Minix, and he asked a sysadmin for some server space, and so he just called it Linux for Linus's Minix. And so a server admin naming a folder gave us the name of the Linux kernel.
And that's I didn't know that one. That's a good one. That's some good trivia there.
It wasn't Linus wanted to call it Freaks, which was a combination of freak and the X in Unix, but the system guy didn't want a folder called Freaks, so he called it Linux.
Could you imagine that if you're the system admin and some guy wants you to make a folder named Freaks?
Freax.
I wouldn't do it if I was a system admin. That, you know, even now, if someone had asked me to make a folder for him and as a server share Freaks, I don't think I would do it.
So it was like free X, right? So that's what he was going for. Just like you know, Unix has been called X, Unisys, Unix derivative has been called X for a while. So it was free X, but he did it the FREA to, you know, harken back to the phone freakers, because hacking wasn't even really a word in 1991, 92 when this came about. So anyway, some interesting Linux trivia for our show that's not about Linux. Did you know that it's called WD-40? Because it's a water displacement formula, and the first 39 versions didn't work. That's an engineer at work right there.
Yep, that is. And it's based with fish oil.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's fish oil is one of the main ingredients in WD-40 and its water displacement ability. So,
because the idea it was to not just protect against water, but to actually remove water from where. So if you've already got something that's rusted, rust is an oxidization that happens when metal and water, when the hydrogen and the oxygen meet with the ferrous components in iron, they produce rust and they freeze up. But if you remove the water, you can free up a rusted bolt, hence water displacement. And just like any good engineer, it was WD-38, WD-39, WD-40. Hey, what do you know? That works. And what are you going to call this thing? WD-40. Why not?
Sure, it works for me. I'm sure the group of them were like, I don't know any good words. We'll just
Right.
stay with the WD-40.
Maybe he wanted to call it Freaks, and the marketing department didn't like that. And I bet every American household has at least one can of WD-40 in that. We have two, three actually. There's one upstairs, one downstairs, one in the garage.
Yep, all the best places to have them.
Because as has been said, one only needs two tools in life: WD-40 to make things go, and duct tape to make them stop.
I like it. Oh, I wish I could remember some of the duct tape trivia.
Oh yeah. So
I can't think of any. But yeah, duct tape is another one that has a weird history like WD-40 does, and I wish I could remember some of it.
Yeah, the name is Duck, D-U-C-K, quack quack. That later came to be used on air ducts, D-U-C-T. So the actual proper name is duck quack quack tape, but people call it air duct tape.
Right. But now air duct tape doesn't even use duct tape. It's silver
Right.
and heat resistant.
The insulated stuff.
Yep.
All right, next little bit of trivia. Post-its were a failed attempt by Dr. Spencer Silver to make a new form of super glue. While working to create a super strong glue, he actually created a very weak glue that didn't lose its tackiness after being reused. And so he was sure that we could do something with this. It was a great idea. He had this vat of it, and he couldn't come up with any use for it. And a friend of his, who I didn't write his name down, I forgot, who worked at 3M with him, put it on a bookmark for his church hymnal so that wouldn't keep losing his place. And then the idea was born. So we put it on the bookmark. I can stick it on any page, and it never seems to lose its stickiness. It just lasts forever. So they went to a lab nearby and said, hey, give me some scrap paper. And all they had was yellow paper. Thus, the yellow Post-it note was born.
And now you wouldn't find an office without at least a couple handfuls of these.
Yes. And once the patent ran out, people were able to use it on everything. And so now they're not 3M anymore. 3M, by the way, stands for Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. They were a mining company. Talk about a company that's pivoted over the years.
That's a huge pivot. But yeah, 3M and their Post-it notes that now everyone has the ability to make.
And like you said, you can't go anywhere without them. And it's really amazing that the residue, it doesn't leave residue on anything. You can stick it on a computer monitor, and I'm obsessive about keeping my computer monitors clean. I have some coworkers who just love to touch monitors. I keep a squirt bottle and a microfiber cloth in my desk because I know anytime one of my coworkers leaves, I'm going to scrub down my monitor because they just, they don't know how to hover. And so I'll grab a pen or something without human grease all over it if I want to illustrate something on a monitor. But no, some people just have to just lick it and slobber on it, and go, and they come to my cube to do it. And as soon as they leave, I wipe it off. But I don't mind putting a Post-it there because it leaves no residue. It's great for OCD people like me.
It is. Except for the Post-it notes that have the super stacky or super sticky flag on them. Don't put those on monitors. They'll rip the pixels out of your screens. Found that out the hard way at the school district. Some of the super sticky Post-it notes made its way into some kids' hands, and they were sticking all the Post-it or all the monitors, and we ended up with quite a few broken monitors because it ripped the screens off
which is actually closer to the glue that Dr. Silver was trying to create in the first place.
Yep.
It took him 30 years to get around to it.
Well, he just now probably ran out of all that extra money from the first one.
And they had a hard time figuring out a way to market Post-it notes for a long time. In fact, it failed under a couple different variations, and eventually they got it right like 15 years later. But on the subject of marketing, did you know that the practice of electrocuting humans in the U.S. was a marketing stunt?
Really?
Yes. So
that's a good one.
Early on in the days of the current wars, Thomas Edison was pushing DC current, and Westinghouse, I forget his first name, was pushing alternating current. And so when they each wanted to electrify cities and light up the world, Edison was firmly in the DC camp and Westinghouse was firmly in the AC camp. AC won out eventually because it's easier to transform up and cheaper to send many thousands of volts over long distances. You lose a lot of energy, but it's easier to recoup that energy when you're using AC than it is over DC. You don't have to for physics reasons, science. But during this early period, there was a war going on, and Edison wanted to prove that alternating current was the more deadly current. DC current tends to be more harmonious with the human body. You can still die from DC current, but it takes a lot more current to kill you than it does with AC. So right. Edison would hire people to bring him dogs, neighborhood dogs and cats, and he would pay them for the cats. And it ended up people were like losing their pets because unscrupulous people were bringing them to Edison. And he would hold big like town hall meetings where he would fry these animals with alternating current. And he wanted to associate AC with death. And right. He went so far as to talk to the state penitentiary and say, let me create you a chair that will execute your prisoners. Because at that time, still hanging was the proper way to do it. And the state was looking for a more humane way. And some of the research had shown that you don't really feel much when you're being electrocuted, as opposed to hanging, where you hang there until you expire because you can't draw right. breath any longer. So Edison created the first electric chair using Westinghouse's AC current, and it was called electroexecution. That word became electrocution, and now anytime somebody dies or comes near death from electricity, we call it electrocution because of a marketing stunt where Edison was trying to tank Westinghouse.
That's a good bit of history there. So now I can blame Edison for all my zaps.
Right. And if you were using DC current, you would be much less likely to get shocked. You could work on live wires much more safely, but you would have to have a battery or a generator in your house. It would be right. Impractical for the generator to be tens to hundreds of miles away, as you can do with alternating current.
Interesting.
So in the end, Westinghouse won, and Edison ended up proving his point, because the electrocutions were efficient and effective, and people thought, well, this AC current seems to work pretty well for killing people. Let's see how well it works for other things too.
That's interesting. Oh,
there's loads of evidence to prove that Edison was kind of a tool. And rounding up neighborhood animals. Admittedly, he wasn't the one doing it. He just didn't ask where the cats and dogs came from. He just said, right. I'll give you $1 for a cat so that I can execute it town hall style. That's kind of a dick thing to do right there.
I would say it's more than kind of. That's really dickish.
And one of his crowning achievements was he actually fried an elephant that was aged, and he got it from the circus or the zoo, I forget which, and showed that Westinghouse's death current was so powerful it could even kill an elephant.
There you go.
And he would contrast that by having people like put DC wires in their tongues and be just fine. I mean, we've all tested a 9-volt that way, right? It stings a bit, but it's not going to hurt you.
Right. Wow. That's shocking.
But a bum.
Yeah. So I had to. It was there. I had to.
So that's my slate of just weird trivia. I asked Chris to troll his deep knowledge of games. What do you got for us, Chris?
Yeah, my deep knowledge of games and trivia kind of fell out the window. But I do have a couple that I'll bring up that I always think are interesting, because a lot of people don't realize the video game Final Fantasy, that all the RPG players play, and it was this monster hit forever and ever. It originally was because the designer of the game, I think it was a designer, but anyway, it was his Hail Mary. It was his Final Fantasy.
Oh, nice.
So that was why he named it the way he did, not realizing or not thinking that this would be anything more than a Hail Mary play, because his company was going out of business, and it ended up becoming a monster seller for them. So that's why Final Fantasy is called Final Fantasy, in case you didn't know.
I
I thought that was
played.
a pretty good one.
I had a brief dalliance with like Final Fantasy 74, where there were so many of them early on. I think it was 8 or 9 or 7 or 8, somewhere around there. Back in high school. That's how long that game's been around.
Yeah, it's been around forever. Um, and the number scheme is actually broken if you just go off of US releases, because there was Final Fantasy, and then there was all the way up to the releasing that came over to the United States was only 1, 2, and then 6 made it to the United States. So there was other ones that were released between Final Fantasy 1 and 2, and then what everyone thought was 3 in the Super Nintendo world, which is technically 6 in the actual number scheme, because 7 was on the PlayStation, which is that monster hit on the PlayStation. So the ones you probably played in high school was the Final Fantasy 3,
Probably.
which was Super Nintendo. And
now this was PC based. This was on the old
Oh.
TRS 80s.
Oh, okay. So that could, well, you might have got a Final Fantasy, the actual numbers right for 2 and for after 2, because they did try to bring some of them over and ported, but they were always bad translations or one reason or another. But just recently, in the last 3-4 years, they started bringing them. Well, more than 3-4 years now, but they started retranslating and redrawing all the old graphics and everything, and bringing them out for like your Android phones and the
Right.
DS, the 3DS. So we're seeing more of those old school games come back to play with us.
Because my phone has more power than a Super NES did in its day.
Right. Which is entertaining to think about it,
Right.
considering how the Super Nintendo was started its pricing point at $255, if I remember right, when I bought mine.
And I know people who will have a Bluetooth full size multi button controller connected to their phone, and then the phone connected to their TV through an HDMI or Chromecast or something like that, and they're playing. It's now their new N64 that when they're done they slip and put in their pocket and walk away.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I can't wait to see that come out, because like with the Nexus, when is it? The Nexus Go? Is that the little video game machine that Google's trying to market now? A lot of those games that are in the Google store. I'm actually kind of chewing on the idea of picking one up for my living room.
That's cool. The Game Stick was sort of short-lived, but that's essentially what that was, a Android-based stick you plug into your machine.
Yeah, so the Nexus Go, I think, is what it's called now. But speaking of older games, how many times have you seen the Konami code, for those that don't know what that is?
My first experience with the Konami code was playing Contra.
That's it.
And up, down, left, right, B, A, select, start gives you invincibility, and you could go through and just let people shoot at you, or you get maybe it's not invincibility, but it's like infinite
99
lives. 99 lives. That's what it was. And so I don't know if that's where it started, but that was my first experience with it.
And that's why it's called the Konami code. Actually, you can do the Konami code in a lot of different places. The funniest one is if you use Google Now and say it to Google Now, it'll say you've unlocked unlimited searches.
Right.
So you're now, and they're listed all over. And if you actually watch some of the movies, you'll see the Konami code show up in some of the cartoon video game movies, like Wreck-It Ralph. It shows up there. But there's a lot of different video game references for the Konami code. So pay attention next time. Maybe you'll catch a Konami code and not even realize it's one. There was what was the other movie it was in? There was a movie where it was in they had just the arrows as a hieroglyphics on a wall for one of the in one of the movies, and the Konami code showed up in one of the hieroglyphics. Paused the movie and looked down through the list of the movie, you could find the Konami code written out.
So that's awesome.
It shows up in lots of different places. It's one of those things that if it's not in the movie and it's a computer gaming reference movie, you probably just missed it, because it's in just about all of them.
It's like the Wilhelm scream. Are you familiar with that sound Easter egg?
Which one?
The Wilhelm scream. It's a sound effect you've heard 1,000 times. It started from an old cowboy movie. A guy got shot and fell off a horse and made a distinctive scream as he went. And yeah, and some guy named Wilhelm later stuck it into another movie, and now it's everywhere. Once you've tuned your ears to that, you will hear it in every movie. I'm not kidding. It was in Avengers: Age of Ultron. It's a little audio Easter egg that people put in. Somebody gets shot off a horse or falls off a building. It's on in Toy Story in that scene where maybe it's Toy Story 2 where Woody accidentally knocks Buzz out a window as he's falling. You hear the Wilhelm scream. It's in Star Wars. I think when Luke gets his hand cut off and falls, spoiler alert, and falls 30 stories down, he does the Wilhelm scream. So it's like the Konami code there. It's one of those things that just gets stuck in all over the place just to see if you can see where it is. But I have started to listen to it, and it's in like every movie at some point. So it's check it out. Google it, and some people have made some super cuts of like hundreds of Wilhelm screams where you can see where the people have stuck it in.
Yeah, I just pulled up a YouTube one, and it says it's 2.5 or almost 3 minutes of
2-second shots.
Yeah,
right.
So that'll be interesting. I'll have to attune my ears to it and see how many times I can count it next time I watch a movie.
And I think the Konami code, I think there's also something on YouTube that, like, while it's playing, you can do something. I can't remember what it is, but I think I remember hearing something about that. But yeah, Google is full of geeks like Contra. So there you go.
That's because Contra was the best game ever.
It was so good. It really was. The music.
Yes, the music was even better. By far, one of the best video games I've ever played was Contra.
Yeah, Seth and I used to play that in college. If he were here right now, he'd be waxing rhapsodic about it. One of our roommates had a Nintendo and had Contra, and yeah, the two of us would get the 99 lives, and we just run through, and it was just the best thing ever.
My friends and I would do challenges to see how far we could go into Contra without dying. The play until you die.
Right.
Yeah, there was a time where there was, me and my buddies would be 5 or 6 levels in before we would die, because we just had the game memorized, because it never changed. If you knew where everything was, you could dodge the bullets, and I was horrible. I was a bad video game geek.
So this next one you have on the list, I'm going to tell you before you say it, is absolutely an urban myth and is not true, but I'm going to let you say it anyway.
Oh, I know it's not true, because you'd have to have so much salt added to the water for pasta to make the boiling point change to make the water hotter that you wouldn't be able to eat the pasta.
So it's one of those things that is technically true. So they say that if you add salt to water before you boil the pasta, it makes the salt raises the boiling point of the water, so your pasta cooks faster. That is technically true. Adding salt to water increases adding any salt to water does increase the boiling point, but by fractions of a degree. So that tablespoon of salt that you put in there raises the boiling point of water at sea level something like 5 calories. Not it's just nothing. But people still believe
it's a great trivia. It's a great trivia point. From what I've heard about it, it was originally done to banish bad spirits from the water. Yeah. Is what the history that I was told.
The real reason you do it is it tastes good. You get salt in the pasta, and you can never put enough salt on the pasta afterward to make it taste the same as putting salt in the pasta with the water.
There you go. I always wondered what it'd be like to boil salt, using like salt water and make pasta. The actual, make it salt water. That you could, because I wonder if that might have had a little bit of a difference, because I know seawater does have a higher boiling point than regular tap water.
Well, that's because there's so much crap in it.
Literally. Filtered.
My wife bought some Himalayan pink sea salt, or pink salt. I don't know if it's sea salt or not, but it's Himalayan, and it does have a unique taste. And so I don't have a problem with that. But one of the things I ask her is, I wonder what crap is in there that makes it pink, right? Because we all know what salt looks like. This is pink. Therefore, it's got something else in it. It's got, I don't know, cadmium or cobalt or,
Some
cobalt's
sort of
blue. I don't know. It's got
contaminant.
something,
Yeah.
it's got some garbage in it that makes it pink and also gives it a unique flavor. Sea salt is the same way. That one of the reasons sea salt is so popular is because it's got all sorts of other garbage in it. But that garbage can taste good. So interestingly, it's one of the another trivia thing, the biblical admonition that Jesus says, what if salt loses its flavor, what can you do? Real salt can't lose its flavor, but you go back in that time in history, all of their salt was sea salt or evaporated salt, and it had a lot of impurities in it, and if you didn't store it in a dry place, it got wet, humidity would actually the water would bond with the salt, actually break down the salt, and you'd be left with just the crap and not the salt. And so in their minds it was salt losing its flavor, but it was really the salt dissolving away and being left with everything but not salt. So
Interesting. That's it. Another good piece of information there. I'm sure this is one that most of our audience will know, that Tetris was done by a Russian. That's kind of an interesting one. That
right,
when my wife, the Tetris Nazi, she
and he got no money for it.
yeah, he got nothing. He just built it. I don't remember why he built it. Was he tasked to do it, or
I think it was just a fun project, but when you lived under the communist regime that he lived under at the time, everything belonged to the government. It was the
right?
people's government, right? So everything belonged to the people. So nobody made profit on anything. You got your allotment, and so yeah, but it went on to be one of the greatest games, one of the most played games ever, and he got nothing for it, and he's pretty bitter about that in interviews.
Oh yeah, I would be too. But the reason I bring up Tetris is we were talking about things we did in college with a bunch of my friends the other day, and they were talking about how they were playing with oscilloscopes. And I go, yeah, I loved playing with the oscilloscopes in college because I had Tetris on mine. And they all looked at me funny until I explained what it was, and then they're like, "Man, I wanted those oscopes. I would have never left the test lab if I had oscopes that played Tetris."
So you could hack the scope to put Tetris on it.
Well, what it was is it was an Easter egg built into the oscope. If
Nice.
you set the dials in at certain intervals, it would trigger the screen to change into a Tetris board. And then I think the pitch was a volume to rotate it one way, and then I don't remember the other volume. There's
That's nice.
two of the knobs would rotate it or drop it faster. So it was kind of one of those things where it was like, okay, it was a great distraction in the middle of working on a circuit because you're stumped. You just flip it over to Tetris and play for a couple minutes to let your brain focus on something else, which then of course you could figure out what the problem was because your brain was not gearing at the same problem.
That's something that so many employers today don't realize is important. They have everything locked down so that you can only do your work. But sometimes the best thing you can do for somebody is let them do something other than their work for a while. There's been studies done about that where school districts and public schools, and higher ed, actually colleges, where they don't block like Facebook and Twitter. Students will naturally every few minutes take sort of a Facebook break and then go back to what they're doing, as opposed to sitting on Facebook all day, which is what people think they're going to do.
Yep.
And employers too. I know at my place of business, Facebook isn't blocked, and I don't know if that's an oversight or if it's that same sort of thing, that they understand that people need that little break. I never do anything at work personal because I know that they have a SSL certificate on my machine, and they can literally see everything I do.
Right.
And I also know that because they're a big corporate organization, nobody's ever told me this, but I'm quite certain that they're logging everything, so that later, if I get in trouble for something, they've got my passwords to everything I've ever logged into. So I just don't do it at work. But
Right.
that's a whole different story. It's the point is that diversion is a critical part of the problem solving process.
It is. It's one of those things that can make or break somebody. I don't know how many times in college or even now in my previous job, in my current job, where I'll be busting my brain on some sort of error message or whatever. I'll walk away from it for 10, 15 minutes and come back, and the answer just magically shows up, and it's like, oh, well, why didn't I try that before? Or yeah, I'll stumble into a log file that I forgot about and just randomly opened up that log file for whatever reason, some intuition triggers. Yeah. Yeah, you just need that break time.
Yeah, there are many people who would say that's not random at all. That was your subconscious brain telling you, go down this trail, look for something.
Right. But if you're headstrong and pointing down the one path without taking that mental break, you would never listen to let the subconscious come through.
I mean, I have sat bolt upright in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning many a night with the solution to a problem I've been wrestling with. Because you hand it off to the subsystems and they're processing it while you're sleeping. And it's like, oh, that's it. I've got it.
Yeah. The brain is a wonderful thing. Like your idea with the 2x moving your speeds up.
Mm-hmm.
The brain is a beautiful thing.
It's a relatively new science called neuroplasticity. We used to believe that you were born with all the brain cells you'd ever have. And that we now know that is not true. Your brain can actually make new brain cells, and it makes new connections, and that learning something, that it's called neurogenesis. It's the phase of being uncomfortable with a new thing. When you drop down, like Chris, in this new job that you just did, the first couple of weeks where you were just totally overwhelmed and you had no handle on it, that was the best time of growth for your brain. You were actually making new connections, renewing your brain. The moment you think you've got this, you've stopped. You're no longer making new connections. Neurogenesis isn't happening. So some of the research right now says the best way to keep your brain active is to learn something new every couple of weeks. And once you get to the point where you think you've got it and you just need to polish up on it, dump it and move on to the next thing. Because polish isn't about neuroplasticity. It's about refining and reinforcing the connections you've already made. But in the interest of keeping your brain young, you need to make new connections. So learn a language, but don't master it. I mean, it's fine to master a language, but in terms of neuroplasticity, that's not the goal. The goal is to start to get it where things start to come together, and then you dump it and move on to the next thing.
Man, I don't know if I could do that with languages, though. That would be a tough one.
Yeah, and like what I'm saying is it's not okay to continue on. I mean, it's not a bad thing to continue on, but that's not the neuroplastic thing. Continue on that, but then take up yoga and get that just until you start to figure it out, and then move on to something else. Keep adding to something else. It's one of the reasons that for years, every student in the U.S. learned Latin, even though Latin was a dead language. And it's been proven now that the learning of Latin, not so much that it was Latin, but something that was foreign and hard, actually made everything else you were learning better because your brain was in the process of making new connections.
So my new process where I'm going to be picking up a programming language is going to make my brain rebuild all sorts of stuff.
Yes. And there's some other, I just recently read a book about this, one of my Audible books. I forget the thing, but it's building on the neuroplasticity. The brain can also lose functions. If you don't use, it's literally a use it or lose it situation. So somebody, for example, who had a stroke and lost a part of the brain, there's this research company, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the details, but the first thing they do when you go to their physical therapy is they bind up the hand that works. So you had a stroke, your left hand is dead. They force you to use only your left hand, which is exactly the opposite of what conventional therapy is. But what they're saying is if you force yourself to do that, if you can't eat because you can only use your left hand, your brain will find a new way around it. And they're people with entirely dead chunks of brain due to trauma or due to strokes are having other parts of the brain kick in and begin to control the arm and the leg that wasn't working. But the trick is to never use the good hand. So one of the things that they said is like you work like 16 hours a day stacking cups. That's all you do with your bad hand, and you can't do it at all. And then later you realize that you learn the ability to stack these cups. But say you go home at the end of your 16 hours, a nurse will call you, and if you answer the phone quickly, they know you're using the right hand, and they'll yell at you. You know, you shouldn't have gotten to the phone that quickly if you didn't. So they like tape your hand, your good hand. They'll put an oven mitt on it and tape it to your side so that you cannot use it and force you to use the bad hand. And the brain is remapping itself.
Yeah.
They've learned that people that who have lost motion over the years due to just being old, right? You notice old people start taking smaller steps, and or like people who wear shoes all the time start to lose the part of the brain that maps to what their feet are supposed to feel like, and that's one of the theories as to what neuropathy is right now, that we attribute it to things like diabetes and old. It's actually the fact that you're wearing shoes all the time. So take your shoes off and go walk around in the driveway where it hurts like hell, but it's actually remapping your brain. It's reminding your brain, oh, this is what my feet are actually supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating stories of therapies like that.
That's interesting. Well, I guess I wouldn't have to worry about the feet problem since I'm barefoot more often than I'm not.
Right, but that's everybody loses maps over time, and and other things take over. Like the old saw that when you lose your eyesight, your hearing gets better. It's literally true, because now the part of your brain that was doing sight is now doing hearing, and you've added double the cells to it, and so it's twice as good because you've remapped your brain. That's part of that neuroplasticity thing.
Interesting.
If you will vamp for a minute, I'll try to find the title of that book and share it with the listener.
Sure. So, I mean, that brings a whole different. I mean, you could become, to spin back to one of our warm up topics. So there is some possible factoid to Daredevil, even probably not to his extreme, but that would be. And I've now that you say something like that, I've actually seen that with a couple of my friends. I have a couple of them that don't have very good use of their legs, but he's determined to not be reliant upon the hand crutches, and he's gotten to the point. Last time I talked to him, he's gotten to the point where he could walk around his house without his hand crutches.
Right.
And it's just, the doctors were amazed and this and that, and it's just one of those things where he made a mental thing where I'm gonna find a way to move around the house without these crutches because I need my hands. So,
So the book is called The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Dodge. It's 11 and a half hours, available on Audible. And it's science stuff, and it's thick and it gets kind of dry, but it's a list of stories about people doing things they were told they should never be able to do again. And if you're scientifically minded like I am, it's a great book. It's fascinating. I was sad when it was over because I wanted to hear more about it.
I'll have to put it in my reading queue. That's a book that I would want to read, not listen to, if it was me. So that'll be in my read queue. But that's an interesting idea. And that's an interesting thought process, because then if you can harness that ability without, say, losing a body part or a functionality of a body part, if there's a way for you to actually, like you were saying earlier, where you just pick up something just because you can pick it up, right, and then dump it after you start getting the hang of it. Well, most people
I've seen it in my own life. Since I read this book, I started experimenting. I have a really bad knee. Part of it is a car accident I had years ago, and part of it is just being so fat. It's worn down the knee. And so I limp and I hobble a little bit, and I've noticed that my steps got shorter just because of the broken biomechanics. So after reading this book, I've made an effort to take larger, longer, faster steps at all times. And it hurt a lot at first, but I forced my way through it. And now that is the normal way. I now walk far more normally than I have in a decade, because I forced myself to do it. I forced my body and my brain to remember how things work. That's what chiropractors do. When you go to a chiropractor and he cracks your back, he's reminding the brain, this is what the spine is supposed to feel like. And over time, your brain forgets that. It literally it says, oh, we're not using this anymore. Let's remap it. Let's do something else. And so there's thousands of years in science in this, in fields where people weren't paying attention, right? Chiropractic, acupuncture, it's all the same sort of thing. If you prick a numb part of the body, you can start to remind the brain, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be able to feel stuff down there. So
right.
I've done some very small scale experiments like that in my own life, and it's worked. I have been able to remap my brain in some ways.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and then that brings up the other point of I don't know. Have you ever tried hypnotism to help fix things?
I have dabbled with hypnotism, but not as a corrective measure, just as a to see if I can do it. If I can hypnotize other people, if I can be hypnotized. I've never been successfully hypnotized, but I've never had a professional try it either.
See, I've had, well, I would say he's a professional. He's one of those stage hypnotists. We had one come to town, and he tried, and I was temporarily hypnotized until he touched me. Then I snapped out. But I ended up buying one of his hypnotism audio CDs to see if it would help, and it was one on to improve the memory, not just remembering things, but to be able to pull things up quicker and faster. Uh, I want to say it's helped because I'm not stumbling any as much as I used to uh, for words and phrasing and people. But the one thing I really would love to figure out a way for my brain to be remapped is to remember names that for faces.
Right.
Because I remember faces like no one's business, but I can't remember names.
Names have always been a hard thing, and there are tricks for that. And there, you know, you see the guys on TV who can memorize an entire audience's names after a few seconds, and it's just a matter of learning those tricks.
It's just one of those things that I never did growing up.
Right. I'm terrible with names. I literally forget my family's names. I don't think I honestly think there's some sort of failure in my brain.
Well, there is a disease, or I don't want to call it a disease, but it's a issue where you are face blind.
Right.
And I was watching a 2020 show where he was on one of the guys. He's a famous dude who has this problem, and he memorizes people's names with an article of clothing they're wearing, or you know, the way their mustache is cut, or something that isn't a face. And I just when I watched that, I'm like, wow, to go through life and not know anyone's name because you looked at their face, but to know their name based on their shoes or something minute like that, it just blew my mind when I watched it.
Wife gets a new hairdo, he doesn't know who she is anymore.
Right. That would be crazy.
All right. That was a fun show, I think. Trivia and ramblings and stuff we've read. And I'm sure some part of the audience is saying, come on back, Seth, keep these guys in line. But, you know, they said the same thing when you were gone. They said that Seth and I went on. So really, I think we've seen the problem is me. It takes two people to keep me on track.
No, what I would say is when we're not at full strength, when the three of us aren't together, the chemistry's wrong. We don't make or we don't make water or some other chemical thing. Because I've when I've listened to our shows, when someone's gone, we just don't quite have the same bang that we do when everyone's here.
Takes three to make something that starts with 3. So if this is the part of the show where I tell you how you can contact us, elementop.com, click the contact us button at the top of the page, send an email to edl@elementop.com. If you want to send Stump the Sultan questions to just Chris or just Seth, I'm pretty sure they both have Element OP addresses. So you can send it to Chris@elementop.com or Seth@elementop.com. That will go to them without going to me. So when we've built up an hour's worth of those, we'll do the Stump the Sultan show. But also, what's some fascinating trivia? We'll sprinkle those in throughout the next several shows that we left out. Something that most people don't know, but you do. Show it off and also educate us all. As I say so many times, you are the reason we do this show. Thank you for listening, Chris. Thanks for being a great host. We look forward to having Seth back, but it's certainly been nice learning a little more about you in his absence. So thanks for being with us. And for now, I'm going to say that ends this episode of Everyday Linux.
See ya.
All right. And I'm going to kill the broadcast again, intentionally this time.